Good evening again. Good to have the opportunity to come together and continue studying in the book of 1 Kings. We're going to pick up there at the beginning of 1 Kings chapter 4. We had briefly read into the first list of names there. We'll go ahead and start at the top of chapter 4 and read back through it. You go to a list of names and it's like, okay, what can I really get from this? But if you really start looking down into the list, there's a lot of information that's there pertaining, especially in this instance, the administration of Solomon. And this is another part of the wisdom that we're seeing. But so far we've covered in chapter 3 under this one heading, wisdom and understanding, is chapter 3 verse 1 through 4 verse 34. And we're coming into that last section right here. But we've looked at the humble requests of Solomon, and we saw his humility and his wisdom in asking God for the ability to discern and be able to give justice to all of the nation. It was a great task he had before him. So we saw this humility and wisdom even in that. But also we saw where God gave him this discernment. And we see it executed in a situation with the two women, both with a child, and one child dies, and the one kind of takes the living child and puts the dead child by this mother, and Solomon's able to sort this situation out. A pretty trying situation if I was to guess. I couldn't imagine the emotions in these two women crying and fighting over this one child, but Solomon's able to figure it out maybe in a way we would never think, right? But his wisdom is seen. Then we get to this section, and I put it Solomon the Wise because there is still great wisdom seen in this administration of Solomon. And the more that we move through the chapter, after we get past all of these names and what their responsibilities are, you'll see kind of what effect it has had on God's people or on this nation, and how they are thriving, how they are prosperous, and how they have no lack of any need. Everything that they need is there, and they're just continuing to grow. The boundaries are bulging. The nation is growing in number to the point it can't be numbered. Things are going really, really good for them. Now, what I tried to do is, oh yeah, it's big enough you can see it. I wasn't sure. The first 6 verses basically are these officials. And what it says there at the beginning of chapter 4 in 1 Kings, it says, so King Solomon was king over all of Israel, and given the statement, yes, he's reigning over all of Israel, all of God's people. They're under this one king. And then it goes on to list these officials within the text. And basically what you have is priest, you have scribes, a recorder, the commander of the army, more priests mentioned. The one who is over the officers, which we'll discuss, is actually officers, or you could call them governors over all these different territories. And then you have the one over the household of Solomon, as well as this individual who is over the labor force. And I thought maybe if I put it up there kind of in this format, it would be a little bit easier to see what's going on in the text. But we'll go ahead and read these first 6 verses, make a few comments about this, and then we'll move into the next section. And maybe we'll get through all these names and stuff rather quickly. We'll see. 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 2. And these were his officials: Azariah, the son of Zadok, the priest, Elihoreph, and Ahijah, the son of Shisha, scribes, Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, the recorder, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, over the army, Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, Azariah, the son of Nathan, over the officers, Zabud, the son of Nathan, a priest and the king's friend, Ahishar, over the household, and Adoniram, the son, Abda, over the labor force. Man, I got all the way to the last 3 names and now I started struggling. Thought I was doing good there for a second. Okay, so the kingdom is completely established. What we've already seen in previous texts, 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 46, it's established at the hands of Solomon. Now, this is something that David couldn't actually fully do in his own reign as a king, because he was continually on the run, or he was continually with threats, or he was continually, fighting these different wars that he was fighting. So he never could experience the kingdom as Solomon is experiencing it right now. So we see even Solomon, as this reign that he has started, he has even this wisdom in how he starts to put together his administration. And there's a few names in here. One of them, Jehoshaphat, this is actually one that ties back to David's administration. He was, I don't remember his exact title. That's in 2 Samuel. But 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 16, I believe. But he was in David's administration. We remember a few of the names. Benaiah, of course, the commander over the army. We remember Zadok the priest. Abiathar the priest. And I think the last time we even discussed, because Abiathar was a priest that was removed, right? He was sent away to that land where basically the priest would retire and his duties were taken away from him. And we even commented a little bit about the fact that his name is found in this list in verse 4. Well, he's still a priest. That was a birthright, so it's not something that could just necessarily be removed, but he could be removed from his priestly duties. So his name is still found in the list. One other one you could think about, Nathan. There's some questions as far as which Nathan this is. This is either Nathan the prophet or Nathan, what would be a brother to Solomon. If it were Nathan, the brother to Solomon, these two names that are sons of Nathan would be nephews of Solomon. Now in verse 5, would it also reference he was the king's friend if he was his nephew as well? I'm not sure. Difference in belief between different writers as to who this Nathan is. I don't necessarily think it's of great importance to know who he is exactly, but it is likely one of those Nathans that we have seen in the previous text. Now, some of these names within this text we already recognize even in looking at the previous studies that we have had. You remember what David's words to Solomon were? Even his last words as he told him, here's some people that I need you to take care of. He said, use your wisdom in this, right? Use your judgment and you use your wisdom and you take care of this situation in the way that you see fit. Well, some of the names that are found in this list are because of Solomon's choice in how to handle those situations. His wisdom is seen in how he has began to put this administration together. Now, we'll move into the next section. Any questions or comments on those? No? Good? Okay. This next section, when you saw in verse 5 where it says, Azariah the son of Nathan over the officers, the Hebrew word that is used in verse 5 for officers is the same Hebrew word that is used in verse 7 for the 12 governors. So, same word being used there, just translated. No, in my Bible, in the New King James, it's officers and governors. Other translations might say something different, but it's the same Hebrew word in that. Now, some of these names that we're fixing to come across when we go across this list, and I don't know if you can see those, but the red doesn't stand out real good on that map, but that's what comes in our Bible app, or our Bible accordance maps. But these names that are on here, these different locations all across the land, and essentially what we're going to see is these different governors or these different officers are somewhat governing over this portion of land. And their responsibility is even seen within the text in verse 7 of the provisions that they are to provide for the king's household once a month. Each one of them will have a month out of the year. And we'll look at some of these lists of provisions that King Solomon gets later. Pretty impressive. But this is the different areas. We'll come back to this map after we move through it. But this is kind of where these governors are located all out across the land. Now, here goes the names. Let's see if we can go through this text. All right. Verse 7. And Solomon had 12 governors over all of Israel who provided food for the king and his household. Each one made provisions for 1 month of the year. These are the names. Ben-Hur. Now, you might have a notation in your Bible. Ben-Hur is actually literally like the son of Hur. So any of these that have Ben, it's like son of. So son of Hur or Ben-Hur. In the mountain of Ephraim. Ben-Decker in Makaz, Shalbim, Beth-Shemesh, and Ellen Beth-Hanan. Beth-Hesed in Arubath. To him belong Succoth and all the land of Hepher. Ben-Abinadad, man, some of these are tough. In all the regions of Dor, he had Taphath, the daughter of Solomon, as a wife. Baana, the son of Ahilud, in Taanach, Megiddo, and all Beth Shean, which is beside Zeratan, below Jezreel, from Beth Shean to Abel Maholah, as far as the other side of Jokneam. Ben-Geber in Ramoth Gilead, to him belonged the towns of Jair, the son of Manasseh, in Gilead. To him also belonged the region of Argob in Bashan, 60 large cities with walls and bronze gates and bars. Ahinadab, the son of Iddo, in Mahanaim. Ahimaaz in Naphtali, he also took Basemath, the daughter of Solomon, as wife. Baana, the son of Hushai, in Asher and Aloth. Jehoshaphat, the son of Peru, in Issachar. Shimei, the son of Elah, in Benjamin. Geber, in the son of Uriah, in the land of Gilead, in the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and of Og, king of Bashan. He was the only governor who was in the land. Man, that's wear you out trying to read through that text. No, absolutely not. One-time deal. One-time deal. Okay, but we can say we've read through it. We went through that text. Now, if you notice, I have the stars by Ben Abendad, Ahimaaz. Both of those were listed as ones who had wives that were Solomon's daughters. So the list that is provided, it's showing it early in Solomon's reign, but at this time, it's not likely that he had daughters old enough to be married to these individuals. So it's kind of looking back and looking forward, in a sense, the information that's provided in here. But if you look at the list, basically what you have in verse 8, this individual is the mountains of Ephraim, and that's seen in the text. But there's a lot of these names that you see in this text, a lot of these locations that are very difficult to locate. A lot of these actually you may not be able to find in any maps that you could come across today. But I tried to break it down through all of my studies on the different areas. You have verse 9, which is relative to the area of Dan. You have verse 10, relative to Judah and Simeon, the region of Dor, and you can kind of see how that goes. Now, a lot of those names should be somewhat familiar, right? Continue in that, and you still see Asher, Issachar, Benjamin, Shimei. Remember the name Shimei? He was also a name that was mentioned in previous chapters, one who was actually executed. So it's not the same Shimei. They're both from Benjamin, but they have a different father. So we recognize not the same guy. One's, of course, deceased. This is one that's been placed as a governor over Benjamin. And then the last one being in Gilead. So one more time, you have the map. That's where all of these individuals are located with the same responsibilities. They're governing over these different locations, and in each one of them has the responsibility of supplying the king's household with provisions 1 month out of the year. And again, I'll repeat, when we see the list of provisions, pretty amazing, the amount of food that was getting eaten at the house of Solomon. Some of the greatest or most massive barbecues you've ever seen in your life. We'll get there here in a minute. But that's just a little bit of information. I know it's a lot of names, a lot of locations. It doesn't always mean a whole lot to us, but I think what it is showing here is the wisdom of Solomon. We've been looking at the wisdom of Solomon, but now you also see it in his administration. And we know for a fact some of these were put in these positions by Solomon himself after removing somebody else. He chose these individuals for this specific reason to have them in there. Now, for any kingdom, you could say for any country for that matter, you need wisdom at the head of that kingdom or at the head of that country. And then you need wisdom throughout that administration if things are going to continue to run smoothly and you have people fulfilling their responsibilities. You can easily make spiritual connection even in that. You think about Christ being the head over the church where all wisdom is. He is the source of God's wisdom. And then we all are members of his body. And then you take a church, one that gathers, say the Mount Vernon Church of Christ. And then within that, these men who hold these positions of leadership need to be focused on the wisdom that is supplied by Christ, doing their unique responsibilities and task at hand, and guiding in the direction that Christ would have them to guide. The same kind of principles apply. The wisdom that is seen throughout this administration, there's wisdom seen all throughout God's, if you will, administration as it pertains to the church, and everyone doing what they're supposed to do and following the wisdom and guidance of Christ. Okay, now let's get into somewhat of narrative text. This will be a little bit smoother going through this. But the next section we'll be at is verse 20 through verse 34. If someone will read just read verse 20 and 21 to start.
Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life.
Thanks, sir. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands by the sea, and the multitude eating and drinking and rejoicing. You know, there's more than just a mention of how vast the nation is here as a people. There's more to it than that. You think about even going back to the Abrahamic promise, the promises that were given to Abraham and saying, this is how great of a nation will come from your seed. This is what your descendants are going to be like as far as the vast nature of it. Somebody jump back and read Genesis chapter 15 and verse 5. Genesis 15, verse 5 and 18. Genesis 15, verse 5 and 18. And then somebody else, Genesis 22 and verse 17. Genesis 22, verse 17.
Then he brought him outside and said, Look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And verse 18, On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates.
We're going to see the mention even of this great river as we work our way through this text, but it's giving us a location. Essentially, it's from the great river Euphrates, and we'll see that as we move through the text, but it's marking boundaries of where this land is going to be that they're going to receive. Now, who was it that gave them this land to possess? It was God that gave them this land to possess, right? And he told them they would be able to go in and take this land. It would be theirs as long as they continue to follow his command. Okay, who has Genesis 22 and verse 17?
Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants, as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies.
Again, more than just a brief mention here in 1 Kings chapter 4 of the vast multitude of the people who are under King Solomon's reign. But rather, it's even a recognition to the fulfillment of prophecy that was even given to Abraham in these promises, saying this is what the result of your descendants is going to be. A nation so great that it cannot be counted. It's as vast as the sands of the seashore and the stars of the skies. We're seeing the fulfillment of these promises even in this text as this nation continues to grow. Now, looking at this map, I know it may be a little bit small, but I had to size it this way just so you can see the expansion. This is showing the tribes, all the different tribes as they came in and they allotted the land to the different tribes of Israel, right? Now look at the vast spread once Solomon is in reigning as king. You think about his wisdom, his power, his authority, his prosperity. You see a nation that is growing and it is bulging at its borders. It's growing so vast in number that it can't be counted. Everything that God said was going to happen is happening. We're seeing the fulfillment of these things through even the life of Solomon in the nation, God's people. Now, what is promised to his followers today? You think about even the connections that could be made as the people going into this land and what we're fixing to see, even in this text, where these people are rejoicing, they're eating, it said in verse 20, they're drinking, and all of these things, it sounds like they're living a great life, right? You can make some spiritual application and even thinking about what God has promised for us. We're longing for a land, we're longing for a home in heaven with the Father above, with blessings that are far beyond anything of this world. Now, God has promised so many things to us. Are those things going to be fulfilled? Absolutely, right? Just the same as it is fulfilled here. And how many years have passed? A lot of time has passed. A long time has passed. But it does not mean that God's promise is not going to be fulfilled. It's fulfilled and seen even in the reign of Solomon. It says, so Solomon in verse 21 reigned over all kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines. As far as the border of Egypt, they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Basically, it's giving us some land markers, and my slide is actually just above the top of the screen there. The river Euphrates is right up there. So all the way from the top of that blue section, all the way down to the borders of Egypt, everyone in between is now paying these tributes to Solomon. You could say somewhat almost like taxes or something in that sense, but all of these people, everywhere in between, they're eating, they're drinking, they're happy, they're living a good life. They're living a life that's in peace. They're not having any kind of war on any of their borders, and they're experiencing all of this under the reign of Solomon, and everything that God said was going to take place has taken place. This is a great contributor to the wealth of the kingdom at this time. All of the tribute that's being paid into Solomon in his kingship. Now, in this next section, we're fixing to see what these provisions are. I think it also shows us just how plentiful all that they had and how great of abundance and everything that they had actually was. They weren't lacking anything, and they had great abundance of everything. If somebody will read verse 22 and 23.
Now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fattened oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl.
Thank you, sir. I'll go ahead and, I had to go back and change this slide. Most people probably wouldn't tell you this. When I read through there and I typed this up in my notes, I put fatted owl. And I even mentioned that to Preston. I was like, and fatted owl, and we carried on a conversation. I went back and I was looking, I was like, fatted fowl. I was like, that makes more sense. So I was able to actually correct that in my slide up here. Yeah, I got the right one in there. Okay. Now, here is some figures as far as what kind of quantities we're actually talking about. This is pretty impressive. 30 cores of fine flour. Now, why it figured it in gallons, I'm not sure, but everything I looked at translated this back to gallons. And essentially, what we have is 30 cores of flour is equal to 60 gallons of fine flour. Some would suggest this was a one donkey's load worth of flour. This is what they could carry. All right, so you got like 60 gallons of flour, and this is coming 30 times in a day to King Solomon. That equals up to 1,800 gallons of fine flour. 60 cores of meal, 3,600 gallons coming continually to Solomon, equaling 28,000 pounds of bread. That's what's coming in on a daily basis to his household to feed him and all of those who dine at King Solomon's table. That's impressive. Now, the 10 fatted oxen. I did some research trying to figure out, and some of the cattlemen in here might be able to tell me better, I don't know. On an average weight of about 1,400 pounds, if you took this heifer in, if you go in and they butcher it, they take the hide, they take the bone, they take everything and just cut it down to the meat that could be processed. It's somewhere around the equivalent of 600 pounds. Well, you take those 10 and that's 6,000 pounds of meat just off them. And then you have the 20 pasture-fed, which would be around what is guesstimated about 400 pounds per, another 8,000 pounds of meat coming in on a daily basis. And then you have the 100 sheep, guesstimated at 70 pounds per, at 7,000 pounds. That's 20,000 pounds of meat a day coming through his household. And 28,000 pounds of bread. Now, what a lot of people figure, or some of the estimations, is that he was feeding somewhere in the neighborhood of 14,000 to 15,000 people. If that were 14,000, we're talking about 2 pounds of bread per person a day that ate at Solomon's table. And almost a pound, and I mean, that's what, over 1.5 pounds of meat a day. These people were eating well, weren't they? And then you look, huh? Man alive, I don't know. You talk about stacking them up. Somebody the other day, it was Andrew telling me about this new sandwich up there at, which place was it, Andrew? Buc-ee's, right? It's a 3-meat sandwich, and they just pile it on. I mean, maybe this is something like that, where you just stacked up like that deep in your sandwich, but they're eating very well at King Solomon's table. Mm-hmm. That's what? A dagwood. I'm going to have to try one of these. Andrew was telling me about it the other day. He said it was pretty good, but that sounds like a mighty big sandwich. I don't know. I don't eat as much as I used to. Oh, no. I mean, they'll get close, but they're not going to quite make it to that, right? But even the deer, the gazelles, the roebucks, the fatted fowl, not owl, to what I understand, it expresses more the fine delicacies that were shared there at the king's table, right? It was typical to have the oxen, it was typical to have the sheep, the bread, all of these things, but these deer, the gazelles, the roebucks, and the fowl, these were a specialty item, if you will, and they were always enjoyed there at the king's table. These people were eating well. Yes?
Who were all these people that he was feeding?
You have all of his administration. You have as servants. It's you know, and it's all guesstimations as far as the numbers and how many he was feeding. And most of the people, from what I can tell, they took the number and tried to size it down to a normal portion of food a day, and that's how they're coming up with their number of people that ate with him. But now, some also suggested the thought of there could have been some that came, you know, even from surrounding areas to dine with him, if it was kind of an open invitation at times to come and have these meals and share meals, that there would be that many people coming through dining with the king on a daily basis.
Verse 34 gives you some of it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and
Bring their entourage.
mm-hmm. And that, you know, in that one, it definitely points to a vast number of people coming from all different directions, and they were all coming because they heard of the wisdom and the wealth and the prosperity of Solomon, and they're coming to see if these things are true. And we'll see that in later texts as the Queen of Sheba, and someone who is way far away in that time, a long journey for her to go all the way up to sit with Solomon to find out if the things she had heard were actually true. And there's actually, we'll see in that list also, there's a lot of things that Solomon sent her with because of the trip that she had made to come see him. There was a little bit of trading that took place, I guess, and Solomon sent her home with all kinds of goods for the trip that she had made. But pretty impressive. It would have to be somewhere in the neighborhood of at least 14,000 people a day. Whoever all that is, it's kind of guessed, you know, between different commentators.
I didn't know if some of the people from the tribes that brought food got to eat with them, or
Well, that'd sure be nice, wouldn't it?
feed all these other people that come.
Right, right. I mean, you think about it, how many people would it take to transport all of this on a daily basis? I mean,
And you said they had to do it for a month, a year?
a month. Mm-hmm. And this is, you know, to the best of my understanding, this is what was brought on a daily basis, and then each, you know, area had this for a month. This is what they were doing. You know, you think about even just going back to the idea of how wealthy and this kingdom was at this point and how they were prospering. If they had this much to give to him and they still had plenty left over for them, you know, because it'll tell us in the text once we move through a little bit further that there was no lack in their supply. Everybody had everything that they needed. They were able to contribute like this plus feed themselves. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if maybe he was feeding his army. His army too needed a lot of food.
That's true. You know, even thinking about, I know there's a list in here that gives us how many horses he had, stables of horses as well as horsemen, and it's a pretty impressive number. It could have been military, it could have been servants, it could have been, you know, any of those that were of family. I mean, we're talking about a kingdom that's at a point where it cannot be numbered. I mean, it's so vast. There's a lot of people on a regular basis coming through and joining and dining with him.
Another thing too, I mean, you think about with his wisdom, and I know it kind of hits on it once we get down to verse 29, but part of his wisdom in being even just a smart politician as well, he knew how to keep the people happy.
Mm-hmm.
So chances are, probably a large portion of the city of Jerusalem was sitting at his table.
Yeah.
He was at least providing them with meals.
Right. That would be very likely. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. And who knows how many just in that area, you know, just Jerusalem itself. I mean, that's a lot of people in that area alone. And I wouldn't be surprised if some even just from the outskirts of that, you know, it seemed like it was, there was much peace, there was much sharing, there was much, plenty in supply of everything for everybody. This is one of the most prosperous times that they had ever experienced. And what's interesting as we move through this text, it says that it was this way for the entire reign of Solomon. This is how things were. 40 years of reign, and this is, huh?
One big table.
Yeah, it's one big table. That is one big table. I couldn't imagine being the guy to wash the dishes, man. Okay, we'll go ahead and move into this next little section here. If somebody will, please read verses 24 and 25.
Where he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river from Tifsah, even to Gaza, namely over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side all around him. When Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba all the day of Solomon.
Thank you, sir. It's kind of some, he's restating some similar things as we work through this text, the writer is, and he's continuing to give these locations, yet he's using different locations as we move through the text. But something that is seen even as we work through this section of verses is there is a reference to a north and south location in reference to the tribute that is coming into the kingdom. And the location that's given is from the river, from Tifsha even to Gaza. Now, let's see. Again, it's right up there just under the river Euphrates, Tifsha. And then Gaza was somewhere all the way down in this area right down here. So basically, everything that's in between here is paying tribute to Solomon. And then in verse 24, and that was in verse 21, verse 21 was a reference to the tribute. Verse 24 is a reference to the peace that's on every side. And that's actually the location from all the way from north to south in reference. There's peace in all direction, north and south. And there's also a reference in verse 25 to an east and west reference, which is a reference to safety. The two locations that are going to be given as far as it relates to east and west, one of them's right over here almost on the border. The other one, not all the way over to that far side, but it gives us a pretty good idea of where all these things that they're enjoying are located across the entirety of the land. Everything that is under his reign, they're experiencing tribute, peace, safety. And there's a metaphor that's used later in this text, even in verse 25, as each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Basically, it's stating the same thing over and over in a multitude of ways, giving these locations. And what it's saying is, look, things are the best that they've ever been. People have peace, they have comfort, they have all the supply that they need. There's no lack of anything, and it remained this way the entirety of the reign of Solomon. Now, he asked God for wisdom to be able to discern. He asked him the wisdom to be able to discern. That was quick. Discern justice. And God told him also, he said, well, you're also going to receive honor and you're also going to receive riches. They're receiving every bit that God has said that they would receive. And it's seen in all of everything that they have. Let's go ahead and read. Go ahead and read verse 26 for me, somebody.
Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. And these governors, each man, or when, that's 27. Got started, didn't know where to stop.
That's good. Is that 20? Yeah, 26. 26, verse 26 is this first little look at some hiccups along the way. Somebody go back and read Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 16. Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 16. Everything is looking really good for Solomon. Everything's looking really good for the kingdom, for the people. There's this one little verse in here that implies we have a little bit of problems. Somebody go ahead and read that verse if you have it.
But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again.
You shall not multiply for yourself horses. Do you suppose 40,000 is a pretty good multiplying of horses? Yeah, I was curious. I was thinking about this, and I was like, I wonder how vast this number of horses is in comparison to other mentions of, these horses or chariots we see in other places, and started wondering, okay, well, why is it that he would be doing this? I mean, it sounds like he knows the law pretty well. It sounds like he's trying to live right and do right, yet he has 40,000 horses. Well, I look back even to the Exodus and Pharaoh and his number of chariots that came charging after God's people. It was only 600. 600. Now he has 40,000. And I don't know, maybe this in his mind is somewhat like this idea of, okay, this kingdom's going to continue to experience peace and they're going to continue to have safety, kind of the bigger gun type mentality, right? We have a bigger army than you. Nobody's going to mess with us. I don't know. But 40,000 horses?
So we know for sure he did that?
What's that?
Multiplied his horses? He didn't have that many, or?
Uh,
I don't know. Yeah.
Right now, it just says Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Now, I don't know if there's a reference actually to David and how many he would have had, but 40,000, it seems like a pretty good abundance of horses. Not only that,
Abundance of everything. So
right, I mean, they had abundance of everything that they had. Not only that, the provisions, and we'll see it as we work through the text, the provisions that were going to the king's table, there were also provisions coming in to help feed the horses as well, making sure that they had barley and straw. So they have provisions coming in for that too. Yes, ma'am.
Let's compare that with 2 Chronicles 9, 25.
Solomon had 4,000 stalls of horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the kings at Jerusalem. Yeah, and that's going to be somewhere in the latter part of Solomon's reign. Now, I'd have to study it out to see what the difference in the numbers were. But if you see there at verse 29 in that heading that you likely have, the death of Solomon, that's going to be in the latter portion of his reign. Previous section there in chapter 9, the Queen of Sheba coming and seeing Solomon, that's something that's going to be ahead of our text where we're at in 1 Kings. Maybe it's something with the timing of his reign and the difference of quantity at that point. But here in the early portion, it's showing a whole lot more at this time that he has. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, most of the times we see in this time period, they use 4 horses to pull a chariot. So that would mean he had 10,000 chariots.
That's still a lot.
2 Chronicles, 9 verse 28, they brought horses to Solomon from Egypt and from all lands.
Right,
Well, a lot of those horses could have been gifts.
right,
But they're from Egypt.
yeah. And there wasn't supposed to be any trading that took place in Egypt, nor allowing the people to go back in that direction. There's a multitude of things that could be seen here that are the beginning of problems, in the reign of Solomon.
You consider feeding the horses as well, you know.
Yeah, they're feeding the people and feeding the horses, so there's a lot going on. All right, appreciate your attention, and we'll pick up there. Let's see, we finished there at verse 26 of 1 Kings 4. We'll pick up there and move forward in our next class, which will be 3 weeks from now. All right, thank y'all.